God sent His Son. The Bible seems to look at it differently in that since as we can both agree, I'm sure, that Adam was the first man, that it's a joke, yeah. That since then that God has been pulling us to Himself, that He has been redeeming us. He, with like the Ten Commandments, there was a covenant, and then we would break that covenant, and then there was covenant renewal. He would give us another chance, and then we would break it, and then He would give us another chance, and that's been kind of the cycle. And so He sent His actual Son and gave us. That's why when Christ said that I give you grace upon grace, that the law was actually grace for all those years. He was showing us the way to Himself. So to pose in a question, if God has indeed been calling us to Himself the entire time, didn't just leave us to ourselves, how does that strike you? And for Mr. Strobel, is the Bible true as a rebuttal?
You asked first where I get the figures about how long Homo sapiens has been on the planet. I've asked this to Richard Dawkins and to Dr. Francis Collins. They would say the minimum we can say there's been independent species of primate, Homo sapiens, us, is 100,000 years. Dawkins thinks it could be as high as 250,000. There isn't enough archaeological evidence. 200,000 seems reasonable. I take the low figure because I think I only need 98,000 years worth of paternal neglect, followed by human sacrifice in an illiterate part of the Middle East as the redemption, to show that there's something wrong with the plan, or so as some would put it, the design. And that, as with everything else you just said, he would have to be someone who was very playful, very capricious, very willing to allow long periods of total indifference. Very much like someone who probably is made in our image, in other words, and may not be an accident, just like us, just like we might be.
It would be
cruel, indifferent, incompetent, and with a warped sense of humor.
By what standard?
I can feel anthropomorphically related to this guy.
I would like someone, one of the Christian gentlemen on the panel, to respond to Mr. Hitchens' repeated citing of 98,000 or 200,000 years. What is a Christian response to that argument that God was just sitting on His hands for?
Well, I think one of the things we know from Scripture that the atonement was an event that went retroactively and in the back and in the future.
How convenient.
Well, yeah. Gee, it may be designed by God. It was something that, because we can see in the New Testament the references to people from the Old Testament who are redeemed. So we know that it acted retroactively. And so I think people who you're saying are completely lost in that for that period of time, if they indeed were, made in God's image, I don't know, various theories about when and how that happened, would have had an opportunity.
I'd like to just throw something in briefly about that. And one of the things that struck me in recent years as I've gone on with Christ is that I'm learning more and more what I don't know. And I'm beginning to learn that there's mysteries that I won't have all the answers to on this side of life. I just won't. And that is probably one of those questions that I just don't know. But like Jim has said, faith is a relationship, and so I'm able to trust that person even though he hasn't provided grasping me with all of the data that I would like to have this side of eternity.
Stan, if I could add something very quickly at that point. The Bible is a practical book. We live in a speculative worldview. You and I inherited a worldview from Plato and Aristotle where non-contradiction is the test for all truth, and we're fascinated by speculative questions. How long have we been on the planet? How long has Homo sapiens existed as a distinct species? How long ago did God create the world? When will the Lord come back, if you believe in the second coming? We're fascinated by such speculative questions, none of which would change our lives in the present tense today. The Bible's a practical book. It's written in Hebraic mindset, which is very interested, intensely interested in practical issues in the here and now. And so when we ask the Bible what happened to the dinosaurs and don't get a good answer, we can be frustrated that the Bible doesn't answer every speculative question we ask. But if you had the answer, that it was a meteor that landed in the Atlantic and created some kind of dust cloud that created an ice age and killed the dinosaurs, what would that do for us on this Saturday? If you ask the Bible practical questions as opposed to speculative questions, now you're asking what it intends to ask. It's like using a cookbook to repair a car or trying to play tennis with a football. That's just not what it's made for. Most of the criticisms over the years that I've been involved in Christian ministry that I've seen come against the faith are speculative questions asked of a practical book, such as, how old is the earth, or how old is human race, and why did the Lord wait until 2,000 years ago as we understand things? Back earlier, Christopher had said that it would be a wrong position to say, I don't believe something because I don't like it. And yet at this moment in time, that seems to me to be a position that's being taken. I don't like the fact that we would be here for 98,000 years, let's say, and yet the atonement would occur 2,000 years ago, and so I therefore don't believe it, because I don't like it.
Oh, excuse me, that's not in being in denial at all. It's what I said was what you would have to believe. And I say I don't think under any form of persuasion I could be made to believe that.
But why
not? I don't like it because it's not nice. It happens not to be very nice. But that's not the ground of my objection.
But why else don't you believe it? Except that you don't like it.
I think it's in the highest degree improbable that that can be squared with the idea of the benevolent Father.
But what you're doing is you're saying it's improbable because you point to a storyline of 98,000 years and 2,000 years and so forth. And what we're saying is that Christian theology is narratival. It's creation, fall, flood, the Messiah, and the eschaton. There's a last chapter.
Yeah.
And you can't be reading through the Lord of the Rings and be halfway through the Two Towers and say, you know, I've had it up here with Gollum, and throw the book against the wall.
Actually, that's just when I did that.
I might have guessed that you did that.
That's just when I thought, the hell with this.
I have a question related to this timeline issue. You mentioned what will eventually happen to the earth when the sun becomes a red giant and incinerates the planet, and there will be a very different sort of creature existing at that time than what we see today. Suppose that humankind continues to exist for another 98,000 years on this planet. In that case, it would mean that Christ came right in the very middle of human history rather than near the very end. Would that ameliorate your objection to any degree if Christ came right in the middle?
Well, remember that we're talking about another species by then, according to Sir Martin Rees. But the middle, I suppose, better late than never. I'm still a bit... Look, I'm a bit worried about this retrospective baptism aspect, you see. I mean,
that is part of
I mean, your gentlemen's positions are... you gentlemen's positions are unfalsifiable. I can't, having made this point about the missing a minimum of 98,000 years, that's all right. It's been taken care of over the shoulder. How we know this? There's really no way you can prove that to me. I mean, I'm a Navy brat. I was brought up in Portsmouth, and there's a famous story about a young cadet being examined for his master's certificate, and I was told, have I got time for this?
Well, I was just going to say, we have time for one more question, and we'd have your closing
Maybe I
statement.
could probably skip the Matelot story. Good. It's good. It's a good one, though. You can ask me at the bookstore.
Just take it on faith.
Maybe you'll come back. So one more question, and then we'll allow our panelists to sum up. Go ahead.
Chris, we deeply admire you for your willingness to stand up here with the other minds on the stage and with an opposition view, and I think that's to be greatly admired. This question is specifically for you, and I believe you're probably familiar with this verse. In John chapter 14, verse 6, it says, Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. And the evangelical view of this is that Christians, those who believe in Jesus Christ died for us, are going to heaven, and those who don't go to hell. What is your opinion of Christians who believe that statement, but don't try to evangelize to others?
But don't try to evangelize to others?
Yes, those that don't try to share their faith, but believe that those who don't share the faith go to hell.
Well, my attitude towards someone who says, I have a meek and mild Saviour for you, and if you don't like it, you can burn forever and be tortured infinitely, is the same whether they keep it to themselves or try and pass it on to someone else. The person who believes that is a wicked and delusional idiot.
Do you really believe that about all
Yes,
the many
I do.
people?
And I shall simply have to say, as someone who is a beneficiary of a birthright of liberty in two free countries, one of my birth and one of my adoption, that I decline to be spoken to in that tone of voice. I will not be told, I have a supernatural offer for you. You can be redeemed if you believe just in me. And if you don't like it, you can be tortured forever. I won't be talked to like that. That is the language of fascism and dictatorship. It's directly immoral, and it's a very great relief to know that it's completely mythical. that there isn't a rag of truth to the story.
I'm glad that you have the freedom to say your beliefs, and I'm glad I live in a
sure
society
do.
where I have
Surely
the freedom
do.
to share my beliefs as well. And now if we could...
discriminated against.